And in that session, we will have myself talking for maximum 10 minutes as an introduction, and then Anne-Marie McEwen following on from that. Obviously, if you're watching this live on the 11th of December, then you can put in questions and comments. Clearly, if you're watching the recording, unfortunately, you won't be able to. Although, please, if you do have any comments, do email me, and I'd be very happy to respond to any comments or questions. So let's get into the content. High performance organizations is a topic that's been around for a long while. I can remember back in the, oh my goodness, 70s, 60s and 70s, we were into high performing manufacturing systems in particular. And some of the lessons from that have still been held over. And when you hear Anne-Marie talk, you'll realize that she also has been around this subject for a long time and is a great expert on it. The subject for me is particularly relevant to the whole area of future of work, which many of you know is my particular field of interest. And for me, a high-performing organization are those that do have a workforce that is engaged and is performing properly. I guess the problem with a lot of this subject about work is that it gets looked at as being something to do with social trends in work. It's to do with HR policies about work-life balance, and it's all to do with almost welfare of employees and keeping people happy and all the soft stuff. It's not often seen as being to do with the actual performance of an organization. Yet for me, the critical thing about an organization is that people are not just engaged for the sake of being engaged, but actually are contributing to the bottom line. This is all about organizations, whether it's public sector getting the best value for the taxpayers' money or it's private sector making good profits. It's all to do with organizations achieving their goals effectively. Yet we're in a situation at the moment where all the engagement surveys across the world are almost quite consistently showing that something like 30% of employees are fully engaged, or put it another way, 70% in some ways are only mildly engaged through to highly disengaged with their work. So what's going on in the world of work? We still got a situation in the 21st century where people don't want to get out of bed and go to work. I mean, for some people, work, I guess, has to be a bit of a drudgery. But why can't we make it something that people enjoy, something that people want to be part of? And it seems that if we don't compensate people enough, I love the word compensation because I always think it's not just rewarding people; it's actually compensating people for taking them away from the things they'd really like to do in life and giving them, bribing them almost to have to come to work to do the drudgery of today's work. Well, surely that's not what work should be about. Shouldn't it really be about actually people being actively engaged, wanting to come to work because they get satisfaction from it, almost going to work if they didn't need the money. A question I sometimes ask when I'm speaking to groups of people is, if you were to win the lottery tomorrow, would you still come to work the day after? And a few people do. They say, yes, I enjoy what I'm doing. I don't do it for the money. I do it for the satisfaction. It's a vocation. But an amazing number of people, of course, immediately say, no, I would quit the job and do what I want to do. The implication being that whatever their job is, they don't want to do. And some of that, I think, is to do with the kind of organizational cultures we've developed. It comes down to the attitude of you're lucky to have a job. We're here as management to control you, tell you what to do, keep you from straying off and doing other things. Often I see this when you have managers who are nervous about letting their employees go and work remotely, work from home. because they don't trust them. They say, well, how do I know you won't be kind of watching television all day? Which comes down to the point about trying to measure people by results instead of measuring them by presenteeism. So we need in the book, my book, we looked at sort of two types of culture: what we call the Type A, which is the old command and control, and the Type B, which is much more to do with trusting and empowering people. And in the survey we did with managers, a vast majority of them say, yes, we recognize we want to somehow get to be an empowering culture. We realize that we want to get our employees engaged, but they're really struggling somehow to do it. They don't seem to understand. It does mean letting go. It does mean, I don't know, we talk about empowering people. It's a probably overused word, but it does mean giving away power to people. It does mean managers actually trusting their employees, giving them some choice over how they, not just how they organize their jobs, but how they run their own lives, and giving them back some freedom to do what they would like to do. And that's what work should be about. We shouldn't have to fit the rest of life around rigid work patterns. These days, work and the rest of life is so much more integrated with technology. You could argue invading people's lives, or you can argue technology empowering people to be able to blur that what used to be that very rigid boundary between work and the rest of life. Now you can do your emails from home at weekends, and go online at work and book your holidays or whatever. So there's a lot of blurring, and that's, I think, how the world of work is clearly going. But so, what is it that then makes an effective workforce? How do we get people to be that much more engaged and productive? This is all, therefore, about having a high-performing workplace, a high-performing organization. And since this is a subject which I'm not nearly as much an expert on as Anne-Marie, I'd like to hand you over from, this is, by the way, an illustration of the useful use of technology to do things remotely. I'm about to hand you over from me talking to you from Oxfordshire to Anne-Marie, who is now living in France and who will talk to us from her not her French chateau exactly, but from France. So welcome, Anne-Marie.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, you're coming over loud and clear.
Perfect.
And we can see you, certainly. So
on we go.
So yes, over to you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, just before we go, hello everyone. I just love to be able to see your faces, and I'm really sorry that I can't. So it is a pleasure for me to speak to you. Let's have a go. Okay, let's get started. Thanks for the introduction, Peter. And also, really what this set of slides is about is I've taken the past couple of years to just stop and try and make sense of so much of the research that I've both participated in and curated, and also the work that I've been doing. First of all, on shop floors from about 1995. And then later on with very senior executives who were taking their businesses in new directions. So I wrote a book and it was published last year, and really it was my chance to try and make some sense of what work, changing work, future of work, we hear so much about it, but from my perspective, there are many, many things, as Peter's already said, from the past that remain very relevant as we move into a future that it's difficult to say what it's going to be, but we know it's going to be different. So let's get going. High performance work systems. What exactly are they? Well, when you look at the research, when you look at various research, they've got different definitions, and that's not a surprise really, is it? But one thing that comes through loud and clear from all the research that I've reviewed is that high performance work systems have systems of leadership and learning at the core of everything that they do. So the customer is paramount, but to have satisfied customers, you have to have people who are equipped and trusted to deliver to the customers. And that's a common thread that runs through the high performance research. So it's about customers and it's about the workforce as well. Looking back, my concern is not backwards, it's forwards. Actually, my concern is with now, because if we get now right, then we'll get the future right. And I think a lot of people who are talking about the future of work sort of tend to skate over that the future emerges, and the future emerges from what we put in place that will let people want to do what they need to do and to get on with it. So I thought I could see 10 patterns, and I think a pattern is a theme that recurs. It manifests itself differently, but you can trace these things happening from a long way back, and my contention is that they will still be relevant going into the future. And I really would like, if you feel able or if you feel moved, to comment as we go through the 10. Actually, I want to whiz through the 10 patterns as quickly as possible, being clear, hopefully. But really what I want to do is to get to a point of saying, so what? What do we do with this information? How do we use this information in going forward practically? All right? Please shout if you want me to, to stress anything or anything you'd like me to go over. Okay, pattern number 1, organising for customer focus. When you look back, particularly to 30 years ago, to the lean and agile work, hold on a wee second, I've got some notes. Please forgive me. Okay, there we are. Yeah, the one thing that we get from going back to the lean and agile, from the last transformation, if you look at what happened on factory floors 30 years ago in Japan, and then in America, and then in Europe, really what that was about organising to give customers what they wanted. I mean, very broadly, it used to be thought that you could give customers quality or you could give them price. And in fact, the Japanese came along and said mass manufacturing, mass customization, actually you can have both. And it's the way that they went about organising their people, their machines, their processes, that just really tapped into a lot of capability on the shop floor that had been overlooked. But really, this was really about organising for customer focus. Now, looking forward, one of the things that's happening now, one of the big trends that's happening now, is that customers are becoming really savvy. They're becoming really demanding. They're connecting online. They're not just satisfied with what they've been given, but they're increasingly looking to be included in the design of what they're given. Now, I think we've got a long way to go before customers are really empowered, before customers really step into the power that they have. But increasingly, they are. We all know of examples of customers getting together online and creating a stink over something that they don't like. So that's a real trend that's happening at the moment, is customers are actually becoming more powerful. Let's move on. The second pattern that I've noticed, looking back, and that remains absolutely crucial going forward, is that the old the lean and quality approaches from factories were based on whole systems and giving people what they need. They were highly participative, everybody was included, they were knowledge based, and they were problem focused, and everybody, their contribution was necessary. Nobody's contribution was overlooked. Now, as we'll find out later on, as we now go forward into a very complex world, nobody's capability, creativity, willingness to contribute, we can't afford to ignore anyone. And we do know that when businesses are forced to transform their structures and their working practices, and if they're confronting disruptive threats, that it's everybody, the whole workforce. In fact, it's the whole supply chain, the whole supply network. It's all hands to the pumps. Actually, it's all brains to the pumps. So the point in Uncover Value is that there are people in organisations who are capable and overlooked. That's never made good business sense. And as we move forward into a complex world, that is something that we really need to get hold of, that everyone's contribution counts and is seen as important. Okay, so this is an interesting one to me. Okay, so we've all got our social networks now. We're all plugged into LinkedIn. We're all plugged into, well, I'm certainly plugged into Twitter. But when you look at the research, when you go back as far back as the Hawthorne studies in the 1920s and 30s, what was found there was that informal relationships, I mean, if the work on a factory floor is terrible, if it's tedious, if it's boring, the thing that keeps you going are your pals. So our informal networks have absolutely always been important to us in work. And in fact, the research also tells us that there is a consistency, that our informal networks are also linked to superior business performance. Now, if you roll that forward to now, I don't know if you know about some of the research that's coming out of the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. There's a researcher there called Sandy Pentland, and he and his researchers have now been making people wear badges, sensors, electronic sensors, that captures data on what they do. And they have found that the productivity gains are made when you put people together. So they did some work in a call center, and they found out that if you gave people in a team breaks at the same time, then productivity rose. Now that absolutely makes sense because people are helping each other out, they're solving each other's problems. So the point is that our informal networks are crucial to ourselves for our own well-being, our own sense of camaraderie and fun. But it turns out that actually these informal networks are critical in high performance for the business. Is this all going so far? It's very difficult when you get no feedback. That I hope it's hitting the mark, or I hope I'm making some sense. Okay, so the next pattern is about leadership. It's about leadership behaviours, and it's about understanding people. If what's happening is that we're now becoming very connected, we're working in networks, the hierarchy is becoming less important, and our social networks is where we're learning together. It's where we're getting our support. Leadership that was previously command and control just doesn't wash now. It just doesn't work. One of the other trends, if you like, that's happening just now is that the idea of big organizations no longer, as being monolithic, no longer holds. That businesses are getting together in alliances and partnerships to share risk, to share talent, to share capital. And if we're now functioning in these cross-organizational networks, businesses themselves are now beginning to behave like social networks. So people now, a more appropriate leadership style then becomes including, listening, participative, leaders joining in conversations. So leadership's changing, leading from the side. I think I probably need to whiz through these a little bit. Master motives. High performance has always been linked to understanding what people need. So I don't know if you know, Dan Pink wrote a book a couple of years ago called Drive. And actually what Pink did was to look back at social psychology research, going back 30 years. And he said that we need autonomy, mastery and purpose, that people need to learn. And the researchers that he drew heavily on Decky and Ryan, actually said that what we need is social connectivity. And I think that needs more attention than Pink gave us. So Master Motives is about about understanding what we as individuals need. That is well documented, it's well researched. But also I think as we move into this networked world and away from a hierarchical world, that we really need to start understanding relationship dynamics. We really need to start understanding what motivates us in regard to our behaviour with other people. So what's going to make us collaborate rather than be in conflict? What's going to make us just well, exactly. We need to understand, what's at the root of what happens when people get together. So that's what I mean by master motives. Whizzing on through, complexify yourself. This is an interesting one. I think the workplace and work in particular is becoming more complex. So I've just said it's more fragmented. If organisations are now getting together in networks and alliances and partnerships, there's social complexity in that. There is technological complexity. If you think about something like a car manufacturer, well, you might remember a couple of years ago that Toyota had a big problem with recalls, and of course Toyota, being behind lean and the reputation for quality, got a really hard time for this. And I started looking at some of the causes of why that might be around about that time in 2009 thereabouts. And actually it's unintended consequences. So if you're using new materials and you're using electronics, your computerized components in cars, then a car that we understood 20 years ago is not a car that we understand now. So there's increasing social complexity, there's increasing technological complexity, and the knowledge complexity that comes out of all this. Knowledge in the workplace is becoming much more complex. I heard Peter Day in Business. I don't know if you listen to him, but I think he's fantastic. Well, a couple of years ago, he did a program about GSK, the pharma company, and the chief executive said that drug discovery is more complex than putting a man on the moon. So what I mean by complexify yourself is that each and every single one of us is already complex. We're not predictable. We have characteristics, but we're always changing. Now, if what we need to do is to be up to the job of dealing with this complexity, then we have to do it together. And that's what I mean about complexify yourself. So get together with other equally complex people, and the diversity that we creates the capability of confronting all this this increasing complexity head on. All right, whizzing on. Ride the rapids. Okay, what I mean by that is that business has always been turbulent, always, never been any different. If you look at General Motors, for example, they went into receivership a couple of years ago, but 20 years ago, Peter Senge was saying that already then General Motors couldn't get their heads away from the fact that things were changing and that they were building cars for an old era, and not for the need for smaller vehicles, more effective and more efficient. So making the transition to new ways of working is absolutely a roller coaster ride, and we know that from the past. So I don't see that that's going to be any different going into the future. And if we're going into a future that's more complex, then what's the word? Oh, I've lost the word that I want to say, but it's not going to be easy. Ride the rapids. I heard Jim Balsillie talking about this a couple of years ago, and this is before RIM, that make the BlackBerry, before they went, before they hit the skids. And he was saying that business was like whitewater rafting, that everyone has to pull together to keep the boat upright. And the idea of steering a boat, he says, it's useless. All you're trying to do is to get it going in the right direction. And you're doing all that whilst trying to see the rock that's coming to hit you. Now, obviously, they didn't see the rock that was coming to get them, so that's a bit of a shame. So ride the rapids. Business has always been turbulent, but turbulence is now the new normal. Challenge the status quo. This is a pattern that has always been there. High-performing companies have always been questioning. They've always allowed people to question And in fact, this ability to be open, to question decisions, to question the direction that the business is going, this stops the status quo from becoming so so destructive. General Motors, for example, is a great example of that, and RIM and BlackBerry. They could see things changing, but they couldn't. They couldn't react quickly enough. So challenge the status quo as a way of doing business, as a way of knitting it into your systems. Always was the case, but it's more so essential as we move forward. This is another interesting one to me anyway, orchestrate serendipity. A lot of the work that I'm drawing on for these patterns isn't only looking backwards, it's work that I've been doing with Dr. Marie Puiburo, and she is Director of Workplace Innovation at Johnson Controls, big American corporation. And she and I, between about 2006 and 2013, we've been getting people together for conversations about the changing workplace. What is really interesting, and I don't think too many people have got their heads around this, it took me a while to get my head around it, is that as we move away from manufacturing, as we move into services, the work that we do is very abstract. It's very creative and it's buried inside our heads. And the way in which it's brought out is through conversation. And the workplace becomes the place where we make our half-formed thoughts visible to ourselves and to other people. So orchestrate serendipity is about how you use the workplace to get people to bump into each other. If you feel there's a lot here, and there is a lot here, the slides are going to be available to you afterwards. The notes that I've made for each of the slide headings will be available to you as well. So, if this is all going a bit too quickly, you'll have a chance to go back over it. Okay, so the final pattern is about how we learn. As I say, work and the workplace, depending on what you do, but work has we've never been robotic. People have never been robotic, even in the most simple of manufacturing environments, which is really what I'm familiar with. Nothing was ever ordained. There were always things going wrong. There were always elements of chaos. And this chaos is going to characterize our workplaces as we move forward. So a friend of mine, Neil Usher, Neil is facilities director at BSkyB, and Neil says that we are all serial incompetents. That because the world is changing so quickly, that because work is changing so quickly, and that we're all having to do things for the first time, work is not any more repetitive. We're shifting towards doing things for the first time as normal, that we are all serial incompetents. And if we're serial incompetents, then we have to recognize that we really don't know what we're doing, but that we do have to get on with it anyway, So use your ignorance as an approach to learning, which means being experimental, agile, learning, unlearning, and adapting. Now, these 10 patterns, as I say, have always been features of high-performing organizations. The one thing that I haven't said yet, and I think it needs to be said now, is that high-performing organizations are exceptional. Despite the fact that we know all this, they are more the exception than they are the rule. However, I think, what now? And this is one of the key points that I want to try and make. And again, I wonder what you think about it. So if organizations have been slow to change, which they have, that the pull of the status quo is strong, and that, as Peter said in his introduction, these features of high-performing organizations, we've known about them. There's nothing new in any of this. But the context that we're going into, we can't afford to ignore it any longer. So if businesses aren't doing it, then what? One of the things that I noticed from the work that I did in factories and then later with senior executives in the UK and in Russia, these were people taking their businesses in new directions, is that it's not organisations that change, people change. And consistently, what you would have is people, either chief executives or production directors or marketing directors or finance directors. I've got specific people in mind when I'm telling you this. They all knew that there were different ways of doing things, and they set about persuading their colleagues to put in place systems that would support a high performing way of working. So I know it can be done, and it's done through people who believe that there's a better way of doing things. Now, you might say, well, I'm not a chief executive, or, I don't have that sort of clout. One of my heroes, one of my absolute, the person who I just think is the person that I look towards is actually my little sister. She's a senior nurse in a hospital in Scotland. And about 5 years ago, she took her ward, which was underperforming. She had just taken over responsibility for it. And she turned it around. She turned around the culture, and it's the culture. She turned around the culture of underperformance. Now, 5 years later, she now still has the most customer focused ward in the hospital, and her story is very inspiring. So, the reason for telling you this is that I think that social technologies are now giving us the capability of discovering all these principles, discovering other people who are not happy with the way things are going and who actually want to try out for themselves. Now, the jury is out on whether I'm right on this or not. But if one senior nurse with no business education can turn her ward around in the big monolithic National Health Service, and she can take the ward that she's responsible for and she can turn it into a textbook perfect example of how to create a patient focused environment where she's got a happy team around her who among them do their best for the patients that they have. My contention is that it is possible. It's possible. Ewan Semple, I don't know if you know of Ewan. Ewan wrote a book called Organisations Don't Tweet, People Do. Well, my contention is that organisations don't change. It's specific people who do. Okay, so let's move on. I think, and I've yet to be proven right on this, that it should be possible for people to take control of their own experience of work. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's possible, and it's actually even more possible if we all get together and do it together. Okay. So what I want to do is to just give some time to these next two slides, because I think this is the opportunity that people learn in different ways. They learn from experience. They learn by doing something. They learn by watching others, and they learn through conversation. They learn through a process of reasoning. But in fact, people learn from each other, or they learn from a combination of these things. So what this diagram here is showing, and I know you probably can't see it very well here, but it's a grid, and along this grid are different sorts of ways that people are now for themselves learning together. You see, learning as a course, there's nothing wrong with that. MOOCs, massive open online courses, they're getting all the publicity. Actually, we just learn by being together. We just learn by what we tell each other. We learn by, I did this worked for me, how does it go for you? Okay, so learning from experience, what I've tried to do is to map different ways that are formal and informal. What I mean by formal is what the business wants you to do. Informal ways are things that we do because they please ourselves. So serendipity. For me, I don't know how I don't know if you use social technologies, if you use Twitter, but for me, Twitter is the biggest um, way that I pick up learning um, in a serendipitous way. So in the morning, I get on, I see who's telling me things, and I pick up insight, I pick up um, reports, pieces of research, and this is just things that people I follow share. So that's what I mean by serendipity. Get into the flow, follow people who you know are interesting, follow people who you know are interested in what you're interested in. You'll be amazed at the stuff that comes to you. I'm amazed at the stuff that comes to me. And of course, I then give it out to other people. So that's what I mean by serendipity. Ad hoc. I mentioned my friend Marie, who's the the director for workplace innovation. She and I used to get bunches of people together about 3 times a year to talk about the changing workplace. And they came from IT, they came from facilities, they came from HR. You're people who wouldn't normally speak to each other. And we would get a topic, we would get some research around it, and we would just light blue touch paper, just let people go, and the conversations we used to have were fantastic. That's what I mean by ad hoc. Do something once in a while. Get people together, facilitate conversations. So that's informal, serendipity, ad hoc. And now you get down to perhaps underneath the more formal, the culture of continuous improvement. This goes back to, as I say, the what we can learn from lean and quality approaches, that you build into the workflow responsibility for innovation and continuous problem solving. And I've got lots of suggestions on how you do that, but I haven't got time to tell you that at the moment, but I'm very happy to talk about it afterwards. And then finally, and this is the customized project-based way of learning from experience. I've got a lot of experience with this. This is the work that I was doing with the senior executives who were shifting their businesses from, where they were to a new strategic position. And again, there's a lot of information in that. So the bottom two in the grid, the bottom two ways of learning from experience, are really about methods that you would knit into the workflow. The top two are really about the sort of things that you might do in your informal networks, your social networks, and you do it for fun, you do it for learning. I hope some of this is making sense. Now, this is the final slide really that I want to speak about, and that's to say, well, so what? So you might say, we've got all these 10 principles or patterns. What are we going to do with this? Just what are we going to do with this knowledge? So I'm suggesting that the first thing to do is decide to do something, choose to do something, and as per this slide here, it could be something small, it could be something ad hoc, it could be something very quick, or it could be something a bit more significant, like one of these customized projects. So once you've chosen what it is you want to do, what now? What then? How do you make sense of the patterns, the patterns? Well, one of the things that I've tried to do is to put together this little diagnostic, because your context is everything. Every context is unique. Every single context is unique. And this simple framework is to try to get people to think about what the different parameters are in their work. So thinking back to customers, what is it that customers want? Do they want speed? Do they want quality? Do they want safety? What is it that they want? And then what's the characteristic of your workplace? Is the knowledge complex? Is it repeatable? There's just a whole load of things. So this little framework is to try and get people to think about the parameters. Now, this could be used in a couple of ways, but if we suppose that we use this little diagnostic to help us to put together one of these customized projects that I mentioned in the last slide, then what we could do is to start with purpose. Okay, what's purpose all about? That involves looking inside and outside of the business. What's changing? What's happening with your customers? Okay, once you've understood what that is, what do you need to do? Or what have you chosen to do? What's your project? I've already spoken a bit about that. Um, so once this project that you do is going to be the focus of your learning. You're going to learn together. You're going to do something new, and you're going to learn from it. This is about scoping what you want to do. There's too much here to explain to you, but you'll see it in the notes. Okay, moving on from project people. All right, who's going to be involved in this project? What do we know about their social relationships? Who do we know who they're linked to? Do we know if they've worked together before? You know, lots of things. And what I would suggest here is to cross-check back with master motives. Do you remember the pattern, master motives? Cross-check with that. And so the questions that you would ask yourself would be linked to what motivates people for themselves and with each other. Processes. What is it that people are going to need to do together? That's all a process is. It's the outcome of what people do together. This is about exploring parameters like how complex are the processes, look at complexify yourself, look at organize for customer focus, uncover value, look back to the patterns, and then place. What is it about where people are working, both in the office and online, where people can be introduced to each other, where they can find each other, where they can find new knowledge. And then finally, perform. Cross-check with lead from the side. What sort of leadership systems are you going to have in place? How are you going to help people to nurture their networks? And how are you going to help people to learn? So there's a huge amount in this short presentation I've just given you. And as I say, I'm at the end of an email for any further questions that you have. Final thing that I'd like to say is that I have written all this up into an ebook, and you are more than welcome to, if you're interested, then Peter can send you a link to the ebook. And really, this is where you can maybe find out a wee bit more about high performance patterns, why they're relevant for the future that we're going into, and how to put them into practice. And that's it. That's it. So thank you so much for your attention. And I wish I could have responded to any comments that you were making. Oh, good. I'm glad it makes sense to you, Maria. That's brilliant. Excellent. Okay, Peter, that's it. I've said more than plenty.
You've done brilliantly, very well done, Anne-Marie. Okay, now we've got about 15 minutes left to answer questions and get into discussion with our audience. Obviously, you can continue to put in questions into the Q&A box as we speak. There's a first one, Anne-Marie, which is you've talked a lot about people having contact with each other, learning by being together, your serendipity points and so on. How does this fit with people being in a much more distributed world, and where does social media and remote working fit into your picture? Because you seem to be talking about a very much a connected workplace.
I'm talking about a connected workplace. There's actually something else that you haven't mentioned, which I thought you were going to mention, Peter, and that's the fact that we're all exhausted. You know, we're absolutely. My friends fall into two camps. One who understand what I'm talking about, and the other, which is the majority, I have to tell you, who think I'm absolutely on another planet. You know, I've got a friend who's a senior administrator in a university. She said, Andrea, I sit looking at spreadsheets for 10 hours a day. Why? Why am I going to connect and talk with people online? And I think, well, that is such a good question and a good point, and I don't have an answer to it. What I do think, though, is that if we are so ground down perversely and paradoxically, that's when we need to connect. Now, to address your question and what you've just asked, I can think of two people in my network. The one who I've mentioned, Neil Usher, very busy, all the rest of it. Neil says that the sort of connectivity that he has online, especially on Twitter, the sort of very quick in and quick out conversations that he said it's like going down the pub and meeting your pals down the pub, so that in a busy day, taking 5 minutes out, you just go to where you know your pals are going to be. You don't have to be there for hours and hours. You put something in, somebody picks it up, you have a giggle, and you move on. So yes, we are all connected, and to your point, that if we are working in a very distributed way from multiple workplaces, from co-working spaces, from home, from all these places, that our smartphones, our online communities, we carry them around in our pockets, and we carry them around in our pockets for social support, for fun, for who knows what about this, very quickly. One of my other friends recently, he's just about to leave full-time employment. Deliberately, he's making a deliberate choice to go freelance. And I think more of us are doing that. More of us are jumping ship from dysfunctional places and shaping our own realities. And he says that he has stronger workplace relationships with people outside of his employment than he has with his colleagues inside. And this is something very interesting to me, that you have your colleagues, but in fact that you can now develop stronger or as strong collegiate work-based relationships with people online. And for me, that's Twitter. For others, that could be LinkedIn or Google Plus. I don't know where it is that you go, but you go where your pals are. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Okay, that does, because that fits in very much with the view that we get to in our book around the future organization looking much more like a network of connected individuals than a traditional hierarchical structure.
Correct.
We have
Correct.
one question, somebody asking, actually, are there any model organizations that do actually apply all these aspects? Can you name organizations? And while you're thinking about that question, there's a couple that come to mind for me, that I kind of, maybe a bit old hat anyway. They get mentioned in our book, lots of other books. W.L. Gore, which has been written up a lot, where they have what they call a kind of lattice organization. They don't have job titles. It's very much people do what they want to do. And Semco from Brazil is another one. Many people have read Maverick as a book from Ricardo Semler, who runs a company on sort of slightly maverick lines. There's a new one, and I don't know, Anne-Marie, whether you've heard of this one, which is an outfit called Buurtzorg. My Dutch isn't very good. Buurtzorg in Holland.
Yeah, fantastic.
I thought you might.
Yeah.
Because of your sister being a nurse, because that is a super example of empowered teams, where groups of 10 or 12 nurses go out and provide a community nursing service, and they recruit their own people, they use their own resources, they are like an independent company organization for each group, and they're much more productive than the traditional way of organizing the work, and most importantly, they have a much better relationship with their patients, their customers. Then interested in your view on that one, Anne-Marie, because that's kind of replaced the kind of production line nursing. If they had allocated sort of so many minutes per patient to get in, change a dressing, get out again, and so on. Now they've taken all those measurements away, but want them to build a good relationship, a rapport. And so is that an example of what you're talking about?
It's entirely what I'm talking about. And I think the point that you've just raised there, and this is why factory floors have always been so appealing to me. First of all, it's the people who were previously overlooked. That just sings to my heart. But there's something really significant in the fact that these previously overlooked people, they are the ones who are closest to the customer. They are actually closest to the customer. So, these people understand what's needed. And this, going back to my sister, I have heard, I mean, it's not just her. I'm the only one in my family who's not a nurse. I've got two sisters, one brother, and two nieces, all in the same hospital. So, of course, when I go back home to Scotland, I get, the stories. But they are old-fashioned, patient-driven. What they do is not a job. It's something that, to them, it's what do you call it if you used to be a priest? You have a vocation.
A call.
This is what it, so they have a calling. And I'm not suggesting that, I'm not silly. I know that everyone doesn't feel like that about their work. But enough of us are looking for meaning, and I think increasingly we're looking for meaning. So to your point about Buurtzorg are now doing what happened 30 years ago on shop floors, in that these nurses understand their patients. They are driven by their patients. They are driven by giving them the best service that they can. There's just one final, I mean, I could tell you millions of stories about my sister and I won't bore you, but there's one last one. I was back in July in Glasgow for the Commonwealth Games, and of course I got the update on stuff that was happening. And the thing that's really getting her down at the moment is having 5 years ago put in place this complete culture change and sustained it. She sustained it. The thing that's really getting her now is the organisation is working against her. So they're outsourcing a lot of the services, and she's spending her time fighting, to the point where if she calls up one of the outsourced companies, they'll say, is that Nurse Conway? Give her what she wants. I'm not fighting with her. She said she's just tired of constantly just having to fight against the organisation. And I think this is what's changing. The smart companies like Buurtzorg are removing these hurdles and giving people what they need to do their jobs well. In traditional companies where control is everything, then the layers of control that you put in, it's no wonder people aren't engaged, because the layers of control that you put in, these are the things that are sent to try. These are the things that become barriers, not enablers, to what people need to do. Now, these are the things that need to change. Can I just answer your question about the companies? World Blue, have a look at World Blue. Don't ask me what World Blue do, but I know that they're big. If you look at the Meaning conference, I know World Blue are the big example at the moment of a company that's doing things differently. There's also another little company called Valve. I think they're an IT company. But the fact that we're actually having to fish for names speaks volumes. The fact that this stuff, that this knowledge is there for the taking and the applying, and yet we have to fish for companies that are doing it. That to me that's why whenever I hear people talking about the future of work, I think, but it's the present of work. It's the now that we're not getting hold of, and there's stuff there that we could, if we wished to, re-examine and reinterpret for now, but there's nothing new, and there's stuff that we should be doing that we're not doing. And that's
I agree. But, one other company that comes to mind as well is a small manufacturing company, because obviously people like Valve and some of these other IT companies, you hear about Netflix and so on, and you expect these knowledge-based IT type companies to maybe be a bit forward thinking. It's an outfit called Matte Black Systems that makes parts for aerospace control boxes that go into the panels in front of the pilot in planes and helicopters and so on. And what they've done is delegated responsibility right down to what used to be the shop floor. So every individual worker runs their own P&L, their own profit center. They do their own selling, they do their own design, they do their own manufacturing. Now, obviously, if they need help doing that, they can gather together their colleagues, they can bring in resource from outside and so on. But the difficulty they've had is finding the right people to fill these jobs, because they have to be very multi-skilled to do it. but the result is a 300% increase in productivity in terms of output per employee. Um, so it pays off in the end. But the
This
difficulty
isn't.
might be is that with the kind of traditional workers in manufacturing have to become much more multi-skilled. There's a whole kind of development program to make people more able to cope with this new world of work.
And it's not just manufacturing. In fact, you and I have been round we've been round the block a few times, so we've seen this before. But I'm sure you'll remember Dutton Engineering. Do
Yeah,
you remember Dutton? Dutton was around a long time ago. I did my
yeah,
PhD I started in 1995. I did it late. But I did some of my research in Dutton Engineering in exactly the same way. This was just they made metal casings. They were a job shop really. So they did short runs of metal products. Exactly the same thing. They had four teams on the shop floor. They got rid of all their functions, like engineering and whatever, and each of the teams on the shop floor was responsible from uh, going out and talking to the client in the first place. So, in other words, if a customer came in with an order, the team spoke to the customer. Relationship is set up in the beginning, and they take it through to the end. They took it through to delivery. They were responsible for budgeting. Okay, to your point about skills. Actually, what was more important there was attitude rather than aptitude. So if you had people who'd got the right attitude, then you can take people and you can show them, the skills that they need. You can give them the skills that they need. But the thing that's crucial is the attitude. And if I can go back very briefly to my sister, this is exactly what she did. She started off by saying, okay, when she took the ward over, the culture had been that people would take a day off when they felt like it. And she said, right, these wee days off you've been taking, forget it. She lost 40% of her staff overnight.
mm,
She had to rely on agency staff. But her boss, and this is the critical thing, the relationship that she had with her boss, she couldn't have done it if she didn't have this relationship. Her boss said, look, the right people are leaving. What you can now do is you can recruit in your own image. And that's what she did. She recruited on attitude. So she's now got people in her ward who are as committed, isn't the word, who are as obsessed by patient care as she is, and she also, the support that she got from her manager, she's, like in Russian dolls, she's now given that sort of support to her team. So what she was getting from above, she was now giving to her team. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots to this, but to just very quickly to your point about skills, if you've got people with the right attitude, then those skills can be developed. If you have
yeah,
people with the wrong attitude, you're on a hiding to nothing.
yeah, right, yeah. Brilliant. I think that's a brilliant place to end because time's running out. So thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for a most insightful session. I think you've done brilliantly talking on the subject for a long time, giving us a really good insight. There are a few comments. People have made some positive comments in the chat box. And so, just for the benefit of the people who are still remaining, thank you very much for attending. On the screen, you can see just some contact details, including both our Twitter handles at the end. Certainly, Anne-Marie is very active on Twitter, so she's an very interesting person to follow there. Have a look at our websites and do give us an email if you want to continue the conversation. And obviously, for people watching this as a recording, if you have questions and comments, do please get in touch. So thank you again, Anne-Marie. Thank you, everybody else. And off we go now and turn our organizations into high-performing ones. Bye for now.
Okay. All right. Then thanks, everyone. See you later. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.